widely seen, but it's actually the map from Bloodlands, the book by Timothy Snyder, and it actually shows the map of those Bloodlands, the Eastern Poland, Ukraine, Belarus, Western Russia, and the Baltic countries. Let's remember that it's huge part of the territories and lots of different populations, groups, minorities and majorities, that lived through a period of mass murders, but not a direct killing. Bloodlands are different from the World War traumas. That's very important to remember because it's different trauma as well here. Let me cite Snyder. In the middle of Europe, in the middle of the 20th century, the Nazi and Soviet regimes murdered some 14 million people. The place where all of the victims died, the Bloodlands, extends from central Poland to western Russia, through Ukraine, Belarus, and the Baltic states. The victims were chiefly Jews, Belarusians, Ukrainians, Poles, Russians, and Balts, the peoples native to these lands. The 14 million were murdered over the course of 12 years between 1933 and 1945, while both Hitler and Stalin were in power. In both the Soviet Union and Nazi Germany, utopias were advanced, compromised by reality, and then implemented as mass murder. In autumn 1932 by Stalin, and in autumn 1941 by Hitler. Stalin's utopia was to collectivize the Soviet Union in 9 to 12 weeks. Hitler was to conquer the Soviet Union in the same span of time. Each of these seems in retrospect to be horrendously impractical, yet each of them was implemented under the cover of a big lie, even after failure was obvious. Dead human beings provided retrospective arguments for the rectitude of policy. Hitler and Stalin thus shared a certain politics of tyranny. They brought about catastrophes, blamed an enemy of their choice, and then used the death of millions to make the case that their policies were necessary or desirable. Each of them had a transformative utopia, a group to be blamed when its realization proved impossible, and then a policy of mass murder that could be proclaimed as a kind of Ersatzrichter. And this political instinct is part of our today's political culture. Well, I also should say about totalitarian trauma, because it's, again, a different one. It's a graph of democides in the Soviet times. If I would use the same graph for China, I think there would be simply no space on a slide to have those graphs. The idea that is behind the totalitarian project is insanely inhuman. And this trauma was dealing with collectivization and industrialization in our time, which was feeding to the Soviet modernization and other traumas that were brought by it. So during this forceful modernization, impeded modernization, we lost multiple traditions. Anthropological change was invisible. Forced urbanization made us urban country. Well, up until recently, over 70% of Ukrainians lived in cities. Now that we lost control over certain territories, we are about 60 to 40%. We have a bigger portion of agricultural populations, but still this trauma of very fast resettlement is there, and it also makes an impact how we make decisions today, how we distribute resources today. This trauma is there. And yet another trauma from the 20th century is Chernobyl trauma. On this map, you actually see the pollution that was brought by Chernobyl. It's not only Ukraine, Belarus, Russia. You can see it's a common legacy, if you want, with Europe. But it's us, actually, who feels this strange change in the view, in the approach to science and scientific worldviews, to rationality behind it. Academic Grodzinski had very interesting research showing that Chernobyl trauma has actually brought a distrust to science, to late Soviet society, especially in Ukraine and Belarus. And it was the major factor in 1990s to return this magical worldviews, rationality and trust to seers and all that petty mysticism in vast populations. The disappointment with scientific and technological progress resulted with a blooming magic irrationality and pessimistic worldview. This list isn't full, but it just shows what unprecedented traumatic experience we had in the 20th century. We're not the same we were in 1917-22. These several guys were from that era. And they wouldn't recognize the country that we live today in. So why do we look at 20th century as for a source of solutions? I think this obsession with the 20th century has to do with our post-Soviet experience. We all started in 1991 with a brave expectation of national democracies and free economies in a world without ideological divisions and wars. Yet in several years, political regime turned into oligarchy and later into authoritarian rule. Economic freedoms were abolished, making us the least free economic systems in the world. Our communities lost self-governance rights. Our citizens were increasingly dependent on budget control by political patrons. Our people ceased to reproduce, making our countries not the place for life, but space for life's decline. We are the champion in the post-Soviet world with the loss of population. By 2010s, Eastern European countries have turned into dystopic states. The experience of lost hopes was naturally leading us to a vast pessimism. The more widespread this pessimism was, the faster power elites abused their privileged positions. Even in the moments when our societies heroically opposed to entropic and weakening self-destruct, like in times of color revolutions in Georgia, Ukraine, and Kyrgyzstan, these actions did not lead neither to a long-standing success nor to bigger self-confidence and creativity. The least satisfied our societies were, the less we trusted, the more we looked for 20th century for answers. It seems that lack of self-confidence in our society have put us into a space and a period of hegemony of the past. As Oleg and Dimitru, colleagues who studied in many ways the way how traumas affect societies, proved that trauma does for cultural history. Oleg and Dimitru proved that what trauma does for cultural history, resentment does for social and political theory. They act together, leading to ages of compensation. Basically, we can view our recent history of these 2 decades as the age of compensation. What did we lose our social time, our personal time for? To compensate some past generations' hopes, or what? Well, resentment, in a way, this long 20th century that lasted up until recently turned out to be a self-promoting model. Post-Soviet age of compensation of 1990s made Sovietism and its mid-20th century opponents to become trendsetters for our societies. Lenin, Stalin, Bandera, and other names from the past are once again influence actions of the living people. Resentments of the 20th century have brought us into times when we follow their examples, their experiences, but we don't have our own. Reconstruction of the past became the leading logic of social actions in fruitless time of Yushchenko rule and in the current separatist social experiments. This vicious circle of traumas must be stopped. Let the past stay where it belongs. Let's keep memories for ourselves and for history, for researchers. But keep this away from social, economic, and political creativity of the living. Let's give the moment of now to have its voice. It is exactly the philosophy's functions, and I hope we can share it with other disciplines, to change beliefs and limit superstitions. As once Richard Rorty stated, if we philosophers still have a specific task, it is the task of persuasion. Well, it is up to us to try and change the tendency to see the past as a source of solutions. Yes, the Eastern European societies have had unfulfilled expectations of free and fair society associated with independence. Our hopes have contrasted with deep and long economic crisis, return to poverty, and construction of yet another unjust society. But why to treat negative experience as the end of the life? Each experience is valid, it just needs to be treated differently. The difference I speak about is the one that is granted by therapeutic opportunities of pragmatic turn. Yes, our societies now focus on the past. Let's change it and make it not in the way fathers of the 20th century did, by conflicting with the past, by breaking ties, by traumatizing cultures with abrupt, forceful social change. We must make past our partner for going out for inspiring and reachable future. This can be done if we stop listing traumatic experience. We must draw lessons, remembering the past, but not letting it limit our possibilities. The previous generations in Eastern Europe were not only warriors and dictators, executioners and victims. There was generosity, solidarity, and creativity behind us. Let's stop seeing past only in terms of conflicts, class, ethnic, and social. Let's see what made our grandfathers not only survive, but also be humans with dignity and daring projects. Let's stop treating past in terms of traumas. For traumas reproduce the past mistakes, bring old cleavages and resentments into nowadays. Let's make sense of the past, draw lessons of success and harm reduction. Ukraine has a special role in the Eastern Europe. Our two post-Soviet decades have proved us to be the weak element in the network of demodernizing societies. We stood up for freedoms twice in our recent history. We were brave and unpredictably creative in finding ways to oppose almighty authoritarian rulers. We proved to be an opportunity for the entire region, an opportunity for free societies, economies, and states. If Eastern Europe can become a place of blooming life and freedom, it can start only with us. Ukraine has a mission for which we pay a huge price right now. This is the mission to reconcile our own nation and nations of the Eastern Europe. And here I want to dwell on 3 lessons that could help us start healing our region. First, we must never let our region be bloodless again. We must be a leader in the process of creation of regional security system. This system should prevent conflict in our part of the world and prevent us from being buffer zones of any kind. All external sources of conflict should timely monitored and prevented. All self-isolation policies should be left in the past. We must be proactive and responsible leader for peaceful Eastern Europe. Second, we must ensure that authoritarian rule never returns neither to Ukraine nor to our neighbors. We should set an example of democratic, pluralist, and united nation with a healthy balance of self-governing communities and responsive central government. Our political system should prevent from any type of rule that could start large-scale social experiments leading to Holodomor, collectivization, or forceful industrialization. Our political system must be based on the idea of open access order and support creativity of individuals and groups in politics, economy, science, and arts. Third, our unitedness must follow the principle et pluribus unum. Ukraine is a home for Ukrainians and many other nations. Multitude of cultures, languages, traditions, and confessions is not only to be respected, it should become the treasure, the fundament of Ukraine's vibrant and sustainable development. I put forth these lessons in the time of huge risk for our country and our region. The war is here, economic crisis is here, the loss of population in war, in displacement, in immigration is going on. But all these challenges must have an adequate answer. We should be wise and resilient to overcome and win. Our future success totally depends on our focus. Shall we be creative in solving problems? Or will we use ways and methods that prove to be part of an ever-returning cycle of poverty, dictatorship, and bloodshed? The current task of reconciliation is the first step in a long-term strategy for Eastern European successful future. The secure, free, and creative Eastern Europe will be created with our leadership. We already pay for this a huge price, and we have to get what we are paying for. It is Ukraine's mission to reconcile the ruined nation, the nations of Eastern Europe. We are to bring back life perspectives into Ukraine and